You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh. Welcome to another episode of the Communications Business Advisor podcast, our last episode of 2024. And on that topic of closing out the year and getting ready for 2025, I was recently scrolling LinkedIn and I noticed a ton of posts and conversations about Pantone's color of the year. Last year, it was a peachy color. I forget the name, but I actually really liked it. And this year, it's a soft brown called Mocha Mousse. And I'm pretty sure that the rule is that you can't work in advertising or branding without having an opinion on the color of the year. And I do follow a lot of people in marketing, so my LinkedIn was full of conversations about Mocha Mousse. And it reminded me of something. When I was perusing strong opinions on this color around the same time last year, I decided to declare a word of the year for professional communicators. That Communicators word of the year for 2024 drew about as many opinions as Pantone's color of the year did among brand folks. The word? No. That's it. The Communicators word of the year in 2024, as declared by me, was no. Most of you already follow my content on LinkedIn and through my emails and visit my website or follow Raise the Tide on LinkedIn too. So most of you know that me sharing no as the word of the year is all in the spirit of our field being treated as critical business advisors, not communications waitresses there to take your order. And to be clear, I use the word waitress purposefully because we are a field dominated by women, and yet we don't dominate leadership roles. And so we're often dealing with the intersection of gender bias along with our misunderstood and oversimplified field, while we advocate to be taken seriously as critical business advisors, not only communications product producers. So anyway, taking us back to December of 2023, many of you were excited to see that I shared the word of the year was no for Communicators. It was reposted and liked and shared over and over. I even did an update on that to remind everybody in July, and again, the post took off. I guess I struck a nerve. Now, I know that many of you want to say no to the nonsense requests that have nothing to do with business goals, and you see some of your peers not doing that, or you struggle with doing it yourself because of so many circumstances. Like you want to say no, but someone more senior is pushing hard. Or you want to say no, but you've been told very clearly that it's an expectation of your position. Or you want to say no because you know it's all for ego, not for business goals. And so I hear you on that. It's a big challenge, but it's also something that we need to take on. I guess you all heard me because you piled in with words of affirmation. But a handful of you took me quite literally on this and freaked out. These folks wrote back about the need to, quote, serve, unquote, the business areas that are requesting support, and how well things would go if they just wrote back to people requesting things with no. Okay, so first of all, I don't mean literally reply to requests with no. Essentially, what I'm talking about is the response to the request becoming a no without actually saying no. I've talked about that many times before here, so I won't spend time on it today. But on the other topic, I do want to share for those of you who still feel compelled to, quote, serve the business. Please, for the sake of all of your colleagues in this field and for yourselves, please reframe that thinking. When you focus on serving the business, you focus on pleasing business areas and individuals rather than doing the work that will actually make a compelling difference within a business. The work that will achieve business goals and protect a brand. Not necessarily please a business person, though that might be a nice outcome of the work too. Importantly, we also need to learn to say no within our own team, whether that's your direct teammates in comms or some of your colleagues in functions that you report to, like HR or marketing. So let's take HR, for example, because many of you, if you don't have a central comms function, will report to HR or marketing. So some HR teams, and in particular, some CHROs, think of comms as their own department's personal communications team. They're to serve HR needs, and especially their own needs as the CHRO. But you may not be staffed to do executive presentations for the whole company. The CHRO, though, they don't stop before asking you to do the CEO's presentations and their own. Nobody else's, though. Then there's the HR team member requests. If you sit in HR as a comms professional, HR teammates can sometimes think that the only business area you work with are them. So they'll ask you for everything from project plan updates and messaging to emails to PowerPoint decks to posters, all things that they're fully capable of doing on their own. And now this is different than if you're a fully staffed team where there are comms business partners aligned to different business areas, and then HR has one of those business partners. I'm talking about teams where HR is treated differently simply because of the reporting structure and nothing else. I think we all know that that's not right, but the CHRO doesn't see it that way. And this is because the CHRO often doesn't see it at all, and they don't know what you actually do throughout the organization. This can be fine if they give you tons of agency and autonomy and you get to work with executives. I did a whole thing about does reporting structure matter, so listen into that episode if you haven't. But it doesn't work if they get in the weeds of your work and direct you on certain tasks that are priorities to no one but them. If this is your CHRO, I'm sorry. There's a lot to be done here to reframe this with them, but it can be done. I've done it alongside other comms leaders, but that's a story for another day. I will share one helpful tip, though. Sharing your annual communication strategy to align everyone on priorities. And then when you get asked to do something to support them outside of this, because you will, and you will regularly, saying no gives you some level of credibility because you've already aligned with them on what the priorities are. So handling things like requests with a self-service toolkit for low-level or low-risk things can then often help. Also, have the conversation. I've seen situations where a comms pro gets asked to do something for the CHRO and the comms pro just does it without question. Why? Because the CHRO is the boss. That's why. In the words of Randy Jackson on American Idol, that's a no from me, dog. Before you just accept it and think that they know what they're doing, go ask them some questions. It might go something like this, but obviously you know your CHRO the best. Okay, so you need help with a presentation for the board? Will you need regular ongoing help with your presentations? Will the other business leaders need help with their presentations too? Because I'm asking because if you get support from comms with yours, other executives will expect the same level of support. And if this is the case, we should talk about getting some help with a freelancer or a contractor or building an executive comms function within the team. They'll likely push you off on this the first time, poo-poo it, and ask you to just take care of it this one time. But then the next time something similar comes up, you bring it up again. You tell them, remember when we helped with the board presentation and I shared that we might want to think about an executive comms function? This seems to be a regular need, and yet the other comms needs aren't dropping and won't in the future. In fact, they're only growing. So I think it's time we revisit this conversation. Here's what I think makes sense. And then you share whatever you think makes sense for the function. You might hear a no a few times from them, but in this case, we don't take the first or even the second no. And in some cases, the HR leader will just take it off your plate and try to give it to someone else. And that might hurt because, especially if you're a perfectionist overachiever and you're seeing the messaging and cringing, it will be painful. But every other business area does the same thing. They do it themselves. But the positive is eventually they see there's a need for an executive comms function because the messaging isn't getting through. Basically, all I'm saying is call out the favoritism going on. Just make them think about it. Make them think about having to defend it. And then within your own team, there's often another situation going on. Staff may want to take on some creative or unique tasks or do some work simply because it's asked of them by a leader and they're eager to please. But you, as the leader of the function, it's your job to guide and direct them towards that business imperative work, not the people-pleasing work or the fun, quote, innovative work. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of doing creative work, but if a tried and true method achieves the job, let's not pat ourselves on the back for being creative by doing something new that we don't know will work just because it's new or different. That's not being creative and being, quote, innovative. That's experimenting. And in some cases, it can be really terrible for the company. For example, once upon a time, I worked with a company that created an internal podcast for employees. The leader of the function talked about the creativity of the person who launched it on the team and sang their praises. But then I asked about detail associated with the podcast, very basic detail, and it was sorely lacking. I asked questions like, what's the goal of the podcast? What kinds of topics do you cover and want to cover in the future? How are those topics connected with what the audience wants? I asked if there was a document explaining all of this so that the team was on the same page about the goals, the audience, and the metrics, how they're going to measure success of it. None of this was done. None of it. It was launched because someone on the team wanted to try out doing a podcast because they thought it would be cool and the marketing leader enjoyed their creativity. Now, I have grace for this situation and for these people, at least a little bit. Comms people want to be creative. Leaders want to allow creativity and encourage that self-motivation and ownership. But this is one that just shouldn't have been done. It was a clear no in my book. There were dozens of other basic priorities that just weren't in place yet. And the podcast was taking up time and mindshare and energy and resources that the company just did not have. It was a hard pass for me, and yet it was challenging to get the marketing leader to tell the team to stop doing it. Why? Well, in part because he didn't want to admit that it wasn't working, I think. In part because he didn't want to disappoint his staff member who was a fierce advocate of it. And also, there was a bit of it because I think he hated conflict. So I'm just going to say it, friends. If you're a leader, you have to be willing to say no, even to your own team. You have to be willing to redirect your own team, to tell them to focus on the priorities first, to even ask them with each project or each piece of content, how does this fit into our business or team goals? Normalize that question. Don't make it something that people have to feel defensive about. Normalize it. If there's one thing to do with your team next year, it's normalize requiring your team to make the business case for their communications activities. Build it into them as a muscle that becomes second nature. It's going to make them so much stronger, and they'll eventually be grateful for it. And your colleagues in this field will be grateful for it. They're going to be stars. You're not doing them any favors by allowing them to work on what they think is cool or fun and dismissing the things that are critical and necessary. They'll never learn to prioritize the critical business-moving work, and they'll grow into the role focusing on fun, nice-to-have work that people pleases instead of advancing goals. Then our field as a whole will be in a rough spot of having more people pleasers than business goal achievers. I know where you want to sit on this. You want to sit in the role of being somebody who's teaching your team to be business advisors. So say no to your team, to your boss, to your peers, to your executives, and do this without directly saying no. You can listen into prior podcasts to hear more about this approach or take a look at some of my LinkedIn content. And if people are still confused about how to go about this, let me know and I can always do another episode. Now, dun dun dun, on to the word of 2025. That's right, my friends. I am declaring a new Communicators word for 2025. It's not as sexy or blunt as no, but it is important, I think. The Communicators word of the year for 2025 is partner. We are business partners there to work with business areas together to achieve goals. We want the same things to advance the business. They do that work through their expertise and we do it through ours. So we partner with other business areas on making critical business decisions using the lens of the audience to advise. And then we build communications that will protect and advance the brand and business goals. What we do not do is service the business. We are not a service department. We are a partner department. And we're not there to help service our, quote, internal clients. I know you all know now that I get a mix of nausea and anger when I hear stuff like that. So please, let's make 2025 the year that we change the phrase client to partner and serve the business area or leader to partner with the business area or leader. If you're external and you're a consultant or you're in an agency, partner is the word. If you're inside an organization, if you're working in corporate or a nonprofit or a healthcare system, whatever, you don't have internal clients, you have internal partners. And you can peer yourself up to whomever's level is that you're dealing with. Even if you're more junior than the person that you're working with, because often you will be, you're still the one that knows more about comms than they do. They need your expertise. Value that in yourself and show them that value in how you deliver your counsel. Okay. So after this episode, we're taking a short break until the new year. Everyone is exhausted, me included. We all need a break. So that's it for 2024. See you back here in 2025. But in the meantime, I will be on LinkedIn and I'll still send out my occasional emails for those of you who want extra insights. You can sign up for the Level More Be Extra emails if you're interested. We'll put the link into show notes. And let's remember to keep saying no to the nonsense and continue with your partnering. Until next time, keep advising. See you next year. If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out TaraMcDonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it. The Communications Business Advisor podcast is brought to you by Raise the Tide, the program for women communications leaders and emerging leaders working in the corporate environment. Raise the Tide is part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. The program advances women in their careers and activates these trailblazers to advance our vision of a corporate world that not only invites communications leaders to act as critical advisors, but expects them to. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide raising the ships for our entire industry. For more information, visit www.raisethetide.net.